Good evening, everyone. Martha is much respected in this community, and while she now calls the West Coast her home, her ties to Haliburton County remain resilient. Touching base with colleagues, friends, and the place she called home and chronicled each week as the editor of the Haliburton County Echo. So please, join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Martha Perkins.
You know, my sister Ruth is here, and we have this, what's called the Perkins hug, and you go, oh, and all night I've just been like, oh, it's amazing to see you all. And I'm just astounded, I'm pleased, I'm overwhelmed, and thank you all really for coming here tonight, and thanks to the speaker series for inviting me. When Jack told me that he was going to introduce me, I was thinking Jack was the second time in my career when I was afraid of what was going to happen next. And it was Len. So I'd been here since 1985, and I developed a rapport, a way of doing the newspapers. But by inclination, I'm an observer. So I always really enjoyed being able to, I was going to say hide behind my notepad and camera, because it allowed me to be at events, but I didn't have to participate in them. And I really, it is in my personality to enjoy that vantage point. And Jack was the opposite. Jack was Santa Claus. Jack was, one of the most telling one is when John Beatty had the cross burning in Minden. And Jack rallied the community, he printed out posters, he let everybody know that racists were not welcome. And I am at the event, and I'm just watching. I'm watching the dynamics of, we had all this Toronto media come, and how they changed the evening by, it was kind of boring, I have to say it, standing outside the farm. And so they were just egging on some of the participants. And then the local boys came out, and they were going to fight. They were going to fight these racists. And I remember standing there thinking, this is how wars are won. These 18-year-old boys who are like, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to fight them. So there's me, the observer, and there's Jack, who is always so much front and center of being involved in the newspaper, being involved in the community. Today, he hasn't stopped. And so when Len bought the paper in 2001, I felt Minden was going to judge me so harshly. I thought that there was no way I was ever going to be accepted as editor. I was just such a different personality from him. And you just go, it's okay. We're just going to do this the best we can. We're just going to keep going. And I have to say that Jack was incredibly gracious, because it is not easy to sell a business and then stay in the community when somebody else runs it. And he just, like Len before him, he just let me be me. And I just, that is a really difficult thing to do, and I am so grateful to Jack for doing that for me. So, thank you, Jack. And I survived, and Minden didn't run me out of town, right? But I could not get rid of the bowling news, ever. How dare you think you could take out the bowling news? This is absolutely essential. So, Jack's fault. But, so I wanted, if you've seen the posters, I want to start with a story, and it's spring 1999. And I'm living on Drag Lake, and it's one of those absolutely glorious Saturdays. The snow is melted, the black flies aren't out yet, and there's so much you want to do at home. And the Kinmount Medical Center was having an opening, Saturday morning, 11 o'clock. It was going to be like 35, 40-minute drive there. I'd like to say that I was magnanimous in taking the Saturday assignment, but the reality was there was probably, the reporter was doing something else that weekend, and we just divvied up the jobs. So I was like, okay. So, I'm grumbling the whole way to Kinmount about, how I'm spending my Saturday doing this, and why am I doing it? So I pull into the parking lot of the Kimont Medical Center and I'm going, wow, this is a really nice building. Wow, they've done a really good job. And then you walk in and you start listening to the speeches and you meet Dr. Elena Mayhew and you're going, this is incredible. This small village has done this. When Haliburton, Minden, they're all looking for doctors, and look at what they've done. And so, as is my wont, I'm now really into the story. I'm thinking that this is just one of the most important things that people are going to have to read. And I'm happy, and after the speeches you go around and you make sure you spell everybody's name right and just get all their positions, and I'm standing and I'm having something to eat and a coffee, and this man comes up to me and he said, you know what, I'm really going to be glad on the day when newspapers die, because you are the gatekeepers. You're for capitalism. You've got all these ads. You're the one who controls what's in newspapers, and I can't wait for the day of community journalism, and that it will be the people who are in control of what news to share. So I was a bit reactive, but still polite, and so I said, well, appreciate your point of view, but I seriously doubt anybody else is going to be here on a Saturday morning. I seriously doubt anybody's going to be making sure everybody's names are spelt correctly. Good luck to you on this community journalism thing. And so, so now I'm driving back to Haliburton. And I'm trying to think, so now I'm trying to think about, why was I there, right? Why had I decided to do this? And I was thinking about, so I grew up in Lindsay. So Lindsay has a bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to Toronto. Went to Toronto for Ryerson. Toronto has a bit of inferiority complex when it comes to New York. Then I moved to Haliburton, and we're part of this big riding, and Haliburton feels like its voice isn't being heard, that it's small, that our things matter, and you just really want somebody to care about small town. So then, Haliburton could have been a bit snobby about Kinmount, because a lot of people say, what's Kinmount? Like it's the Scott store, or it's Highland Cinema, who cares about Kinmount? So I thought about one of the things that had really driven me since moving to Haliburton, and it's we all have to care about each other. And if we don't care about each other, nobody's going to care about us. And we all have to be open to other people's experiences, open and respectful of what's important to them, what they've done, and that there's also a really great meaning to having one place a week where everybody shares the same news, right? So you get the Echo, and in those days, again, this is pre-online, you get the Echo, and yes, you're going to be turning the pages and you're going to be reading stories that I chose were important. Got to admit it. I said that this is what I think the community should be reading about, and I made the decisions to do that. So I like to think that I made wise decisions, and it's this whole process of going through the pages, and you don't know what you're going to read. So yes, you might read a story that has your interest, but you might too say, oh, Kimont's got a new doctor? Oh, this is really interesting. Or, there's going to be, some event that's happening. And the communities are made by thousands of little threads, all these little ways that our lives were connected. You all know that. Like, you go to the bank and the woman who's the teller, her husband is your hockey writer, and maybe their kids, all of these interconnections. And when we allow them to be woven together, we are so strong. But the only way to do that is to be aware of the other people. So to that fellow, I have a bit of a stronger answer than I would have had at the time, but I truly believe in the roles that community newspapers play. So I want to talk about how I actually got to Haliburton. It was September 1985. So I was born in Fenelon Falls when my dad was the principal of the high school, and then we moved to Sudbury. And Sudbury was a kid's paradise because there were all these kids around. Everybody had front yards that interconnected, so if you needed a baseball, you just all went outside and there was your baseball team. Then in 1967, we moved to Lindsay, 69. And we were living in this really old neighborhood, and all around me were all these little old ladies. And, it was like, I grumbled again. And my mom would say, Martha, I want you to go over and visit Mrs. Brown. And I'd say, what am I going to talk to Mrs. Brown about? Like she's just a little old lady. And my mom says, she's our neighbor, she's alone, I want you to go over and talk to her. And then she used her classic line, which was, you've got a mouth, use it. You're moving to Toronto for the first time, and you don't know where you're going? You got a mouth, use it, right? So she said, you just go over. So it wasn't just Mrs. Brown, there were a few widows in the neighborhood, and I just learned to go and start chatting with them. And that, I can tell you that one of my tricks is you look at the photos on the wall and you say, oh, who's that, right? And so I got really accustomed to just, quote, the cold call. Just being able to talk to people I didn't know and walk into the house and not feel uncomfortable. So then in birth order, my sister Ruth here is so I'm 7th of 8. So Ruth is number 7 and I'm number 8. And, Ruth is number 3, I'm number 7. And you get really influenced by older sisters. And we have a sister whose name is Patricia. And Patricia had gone to Trent University, got a BA, and was working in a department store. And I was like, I'm going to need a trade. I really need something, like when I come out, I need to have a job. Our dad had been a teacher and then an administrator, and of course you never want to be what your dad did. So I resisted that, and I just thought, okay, I like English and I like writing, and my guidance counselor suggested journalism. So I was just reading an article in the New York Times, and it's about this fallacy of, quote, find your passion. So too often people think that, I'm going to do a career that I'm passionate about, and then it's all going to be wonderful, and I'll never feel like I'm working. And they say it's a bit of a fallacy, and it's like you work to find your passion. And that was me. I ended up, so I came to this little town, and I remember it was a municipal election that year, and I was interviewing a trustee candidate, and I said, what do you think about the issues? And he said, well, this metric, it means that grandparents can't talk to their grandkids. And I was like, oh my God, Martha, what have you done? What have you done? Why are you here? Metric is like 10 years ago. And don't forget, I'd been to Toronto, so I was, and I was 22 years old, so I was quite full of myself. And then, in the office, there's this old guy named Creighton, It's like, oh my God, he's just, like, what am I doing here with all these old people? So, then, I forgot to tell you. So the reason I knew about the Echo is I was working at the Lindsay Post that summer, and Hamish Gordon was a summer reporter at the Echo, and we would get the Echo every week at the Lindsay Post, and I knew that Hamish had to go back to school, so I contacted Len and said, does this mean you're going to have a job opening? And he said yes. So, in the old days, I'm 62, I can say that. In the old days, so the Echo was underneath all these old references, Ethel Curry Gallery, I think Outdoors Plus is there now, right? So I shared an office with Len, and you have to imagine that he was at his desk. I had an old, I'm not sure if it was an Underwood, but it was a manual typewriter. So you put your yellow sheets of paper into the typewriter, and it is true, you banged out your story, and then you'd be reading it, and then Len would read it and mark it up, and then we gave it to Deb Bates, and the typesetting machine must have been like this tall, like this wide. It was massive, and she'd sit there writing, and the text would come. It was just this tiny little bit. It was about this long, this high, and the words would come out. And so she would be typing and reading, and then the it, quote, printed out these long strips of columns of the story, which we then put on a dryer, which we then waxed, which we then cut with an X-Acto knife, which we then had these page flats. So it truly was cut and paste. And then you wrote your headlines, you changed the font, her machine, it had this big disc at the side to go to 48 point. When you did your photos, Len was in the darkroom, put them all out, and there was like a 2-point tape, and it was literally tape, and you mitered your edges. Got really good at it. And that's how, and then you sent those pages. So it was a really onerous thing. And again, if you wanted to change your layout, like sometimes you'd have you'll notice some crooked lines in the paper because you just were like, oh, okay, or if something fell off, you were in a bit of trouble. But it was very much a team effort, and it was difficult. I remember when Len got our first computers were Tandy K1000s. Remember? So that meant it was 1 kilobyte, right? It was 1000 K? Somebody do the math for me. Whatever. It's very small. And I used to be writing, and I'd hold the computer screen. I was so on the sides of the computer because I was so used to these pieces of yellow paper, and it had to be this tactile experience. So I quickly got over that. But it was September 1985, as I say, when I arrived, and Len did what my mom did. And he said, okay, I'd like you to go interview Celia Brown. And I said, who's Celia Brown? And he said, it's a teacher, was a teacher, it's September, we'll just do a couple of education stories. So I just went to Celia Brown's, and I started to talk. And more importantly, I started to listen. And it was just... it's extraordinary. You're talking to this woman, and I always found it just became easier to start at the beginning. Who were your parents? Where were you born? The advantage to that approach is that they start to feel more relaxed because it's like, oh, I know my name. I can do this. And oh yeah, I know where I was born. And it also starts prompting memories. And so I ended up really liking that story. And then you come back and you write, and then you do 10 other stories that day. So I just was starting to learn so much. So this 22-year-old who thought she was something because she'd been to Toronto is now realizing how little she knows. I'm interviewing people who know so much more about so many more things than I ever did. And I just started to be much more humble and a much more better listener because I knew that they could teach me things. So the other thing about working at the Echo is because you had to write so much, I often worked Saturdays. And I thought, well, since I'm at the office, I might as well keep the door unlocked, might as well have people come. And so there would be people who'd come and they'd buy their $6 classified. And I realized two things. Number one, half of them never read the Echo. All they cared about was their classified. They had a table to sell. They had something, and they just knew that the Echo was where you could come and put the classifieds. So I was like, they're not reading the Echo. I wonder what I could do to make them want to read the Echo. And the other thing was, at $6 a classified, that took a lot of classifieds to pay to keep this thing going. Like at the time, I was only earning $135 a week. So it was, even then though, so you became aware that the Echo was a business and it needs to make money. So yes, it's capitalism, yes, it's advertising, marketing driven, but that is basically one of the only models that you can have in order to pay everybody's wages. So it was a model that worked, and everybody worked hard to get those ads. So here tonight are some of the people that I worked with. So Sandra Bishop is here. So Sandra was the accountant, bookkeeper. And so one night I was working late and Sandra was working late. And I said, Sandra, why are you still here? And she said, there's 23 cents. And I can't figure out what I did wrong, right? So she kept all that side going, right? It was a skill that I never had and I couldn't have. So the paper couldn't have been the paper without Sandra. There's Jamie Woodman. So one of the things you need to know about newspapers is the size of the newspaper is determined by how many ads there are. So in January, where there's no people, the paper was like, 12, 16 pages. It wasn't very big. But then in the summer, because all the cottagers came, advertisers wanted to reach them, and suddenly in the same small town, you had to fill 48 pages, 60 pages, right? And Mother's Day always fell on the Sunday before the Victoria Day weekend. And so it was just a massive paper. It was so much work. And Jamie was one of the graphic designers. And it meant she had to work every Mother's Day for all of her career there. So she could get, like me, a little grumpy sometimes. So no, it was more about everybody like wanting to tell her what she should do and what she needed to change. So she and Sandy, they put caution tape around their desks, right? Saying, just approach with caution. And there's so many, it's one of those things where you're afraid of actually mentioning names, because then once you do, you'll forget somebody, but because they're there. But this is just, we had such camaraderie. Everybody worked so hard, but we really believed we were working for something, and we believed in what we were doing. So there became the issue about why I stayed. So in 1985, 2 weeks after I arrived, a man named Dante Larcade phoned me, and he said he wanted to do a story. And Dante and his family had bought what is now the domain of Killian. And they were having an issue with not feeling that the town was really welcoming them that much, and would I come out and do a story? So I did. So I arrived, and Dante, being Dante, was late. And so I'm sitting in the lounge, and Dante's brother had been having breakfast in the dining room, Jean Edouard, and Jean Edouard came over and he started talking to me. He said it was my eyes. I don't know. But anyway, so we eventually fell in love. And two things are important, well, more than two things. The impact on my career, two things are, he worked every night and weekends. So either I was home alone at night, or I could say, sure, I'll go to that meeting. Oh, sure, I'll go to that play. Sure, I'll do, So I started to go, and apologies to everybody who came after me. I started to go to everything. Just all the nights, all the weekends. I worked 6 days a week for 15 years, and you just thought that was normal. But it worked because, again, Jean Edouard was working. The other thing is, we didn't have kids, didn't even have a dog that I could have an excuse about, like, I gotta go home and take the dog out. So it's just, but I loved it. There's also that. The other thing about being with Jean Edouard is when you fall in love with somebody who owns a resort, you realize the resort's not going anywhere, right? Like, it can't move. It is pretty solid. So I decided that my day-to-day happiness was more important to me than career happiness, that I just wanted each day to be as happy as it could, and that meant I didn't want to be driving to Lindsay to work for the Lindsay Post. I didn't want to be trying to go up the career ladder by working at the Peterborough Examiner. So I was going to be staying in Haliburton, and I thought, okay, well, let me get career satisfaction here. Let's just try to make the best newspaper we can. And ended up doing that. I like to think, sorry, that was a bit vain. Sorry. So at one point, our goal was like 10,000 words a week. So each. And I don't know if any of you know that, but that's a lot, because you're also doing the interviews, you are taking the photos, you are laying out the paper. So I would just be like, every story that I'd start to write, I'd be like, this is the most interesting story, and people should really know about this story. This is like, wow, it's really interesting. So just like the Kinmount Medical Center, I just worked myself up and saying, oh, I really wanted people to know. So I wrote the stories as if you should really know this. And then I'd be done that story and forget about that story. Look at this story. This is the most interesting. And repeat, 10, 15 times, and then you get a newspaper. And the other thing I did was, I'm very much aware that for all of us, basically school is the only time somebody has to read what you write, right? No, none of us, we can write whatever we want, nobody has to read it. So I would always, in my mind, I'd imagine this woman, sorry, men, but I just imagine this woman, she's sitting in her chair, and she's like, okay, should I get up and make dinner? Should I get up and walk the dog? Should I go on Facebook? What should I do? Oh, I'm going to sit here and read the paper. And so I just wanted to make sure that she had a reason to pick up the paper. And then I wanted to make sure that she would just have a reason to turn from page to page to page. And that is, I just tricked myself with each story into believing that it was really important, and that people would read what sometimes became these massive long stories because they too would be interested. The irony was I couldn't bear to watch people actually read the Echo. So when I first arrived, I'd go and get coffee at the Cozy Corner, and on Wednesday when the paper came out and I saw people reading the paper, I had to leave. I just couldn't look. I was like, oh my God, are they judging me? Did I make a mistake? Are they thinking this woman's a fool? What's she writing about? So I just pretended when the paper would come out, and they'd be like, oh my God, let's look at it and read it. And I was like, I don't want to see it. There's a bomb in there somewhere. I don't know what it is. And if I ignore the bomb, it's not going to go off, right? So coping mechanisms. I'm just going to take a drink now. Sorry. Because now I want to talk about the third time I felt fear. So don't worry, I haven't forgot about the first time I felt fear. But the third time I felt fear was when Sun Media bought the newspapers. And it's not because Sun Media told us what to do, because they very, very rarely had any interference, right? There were lots, administrative changes, but they basically left us alone until it came to putting stories online. And when we put them online, it said we had to open comments, and we had to let people write whatever they wanted to write at the bottom of the story, and we couldn't touch it. And that's what I was afraid of. So two things I hated doing as editor. One of them was writing editorials. Sorry, Jack. I loathed it. Even at the Undercurrent, I remember our deadline to get the pages to the printer was noon. I wrote the editorial at 10 to 12. I mean, I would start with this. So I overthink everything. So I would start with a point in an editorial, and then a little voice in my head would say, well, somebody could easily disagree with that. Right? So who do you think you are? So the editorial would start here, and then I'd go to the yes, but, and then I'd say, oh, Martha, remember, you got to go back to your point. And then I would move the editorial here, and then some other little voice would be saying, there's another point of view on all of this, right? And then, so my editorials meandered, and I don't know if I ever did say, this is what I think. Or I did say what I thought, but it was always there's lots of ways to look at this issue, right? And so that was a job I hated, but I hated the most letters to the editor. Absolutely put Such fear into me. So I don't know if you know, but in Canada, the libel laws work that if you print something in the paper and it's wrong, and somebody sues you, you are responsible for proving it right. So you would have to do the investigation, you would have to do the fact finding. So if there's something wrong that is libelous, it's really difficult on newspapers. It's the opposite in the States. In the States, it's the people have to prove not only the libel that something's wrong, but there's malice involved. So the onus is on the person in the States suing the newspaper, but in Canada, it's the newspaper is responsible. And that also included people writing a letter to the editor and telling me their opinions about things. And so I had to edit. I also, by principle, I don't mind it. You can say to me, I think that your idea is stupid, but you cannot say you are stupid for believing that. And there are a lot of people who said, you're stupid, or so-and-so stupid, or council's stupid, or, somebody's corrupt, or like people often said things that were about other human beings, and that I didn't feel that that was a right approach. Again, my personality, me as gatekeeper, me right or wrong making a decision about what was acceptable in the newspaper. And so what happened is, though, then I would change people's letter to the editor. And it became, do I tell them that I changed it? So at first I didn't. Sorry. I didn't tell people what I was cutting out. And if people were upset, and they often were, what they came back to me was, you are taking away free speech. I have a right to say this, and you do not have a right to tell me what my opinion is. And I was constantly getting into arguments, like the one I just made, about you can have an opinion about an issue. I just will not allow people to denigrate a person. That's all. Well, wasn't that all? And, I wished a lot of people would be nicer about things. But it was just, and people were right to make the argument about free speech, because I was taking away people's free speech. I sometimes was using my power and authority over them to control what was said in the Echo, but I just felt that the overall good was worth it. And so what happens then with the internet is, the premise is that as long as an editor doesn't change anything, then all the website is, it's just a platform. It's not quoted, it's not really like a newspaper anymore, it's just a platform. And so anybody can access, and the platform is not responsible for what is said on it. And why I was so afraid is that I knew, like, all of these stories that I wrote about how wonderful Haliburton was, the people, the history, I truly believe that Haliburton is a wonderful thing, a wonderful place, but I also know people are mean. People are angry, they will lash out at other people. If they're feeling hurt, they'll hurt people. And I knew that that existed in Haliburton as well. And we were not immune from any of that. And I fought against it, and I can't remember, but I think I did cheat, and I think we turned comments off. I'm not sure. And it's like better to ask for, forgiveness than permission. So I just didn't tell people that we were doing it. And so this is where I want to tie it back to that conversation in Kinmount, right? So there is a value in social media. There is a value in more people having voices, and it not just being one person at the head of a newspaper telling people what's important in their community. But it's come at such a great cost, and the cost is not the part that, only the part that we know, which is there's a lot of there's a really lot of ugliness that's out on social media. And I can't believe some of the things, and in a small town, that people will say about each other. It's just like, how could you do that? Like, how could you be on a public forum talking about somebody in such a rude, mean way? So I say I don't understand it, but as an editor, I did understand it. So that is one of, I think, the really bad parts of no longer having a gatekeeper. Because you could call me gatekeeper, you could call me referee, you could call me parent, with squabbling children. But I think there really is value with having somebody say, you know what, this is the tone. We're all going to be polite to one another. We're going to disagree. We're going to have, you might like hunting. I might say guns are, aggressive or whatever. All the political things, but we're just going to agree that we're going to live together. The other problem that happened with the internet is how we made money. And I'm going to put some of the blame on probably 80% of people here. Papers have to make the money somehow. These fine people, somebody's got to pay Emily's wage, right? So the Echo used to be able to get $500, I think, in the old days, for a full page ad, and that went a long way. So I don't know what it is like in the Echo, but when I was at the Courier, there's these things called remnant ads online, and they're just, if you hadn't sold an online ad, somebody selling cat food or whatever, whatever, we all know those ads, they would fill in the slots. And we made 3 cents for 1,000 page views. So 1,000 people had to read that story for the paper to make 3 cents. Now imagine how many page views you need. So here's the other thing that happened is newspapers had to become aware of how many clicks they could get, right? Like, we're all so angry at newspapers for taking sides and for, being right or left, liberal, conservative, but it's our fault. Because now newspapers know what you're reading, and they know what you will click on, and they know that you like to be angry, and they know that you like to be, they know that you like strong emotions. And so then there just is this pull about, oh my God, maybe we shouldn't be writing about this anymore because who's going to read it? And we lost that sense of everybody flipping through those pages and not knowing what they're going to find, and just being open to that experience to, no, I'm only going to read the stories that I agree with, or that I'm interested in, or that align with my values. And newspapers are hurting. And there is no way around that. I'm not going to get into the debate between the Echo and the Highlander about whether it should be a paid subscription or free. But there's that saying, and this is more, again, it's not about the Highlander, it's more about that thing about online. If you are not paying for something, it means you are the product, right? So you click on newspaper stories, people know what you are interested in, and you get sent ads, you get sent postings, whatever. So you have to pay for things. You do. Sorry. If you're not going to go and pay, what's the price now, $1.30? $2? If you're not going to pay $2 for the Echo, if you're not going to pay for a subscription, I'm not going to get into the Highlanders business model, how they make money, but the money has to come from somewhere. And in a way too, in a small town, the money has to come from you actually shopping at these places, right? Like, nobody's going to advertise unless they know that people are going to go to their business. So the only way, it's again, we're coming back to how interconnected we all are. You have to know that if you want these businesses to survive, if you want these newspapers to survive, you can't go shopping at Costco because you can get paper towels cheaper by $5, right? Ted's here, and one of the people I interviewed was Stu Brandon, Ted's brother. And Stu owned Northland Sales. And it was in Minden, and I went over to interview him about the economy. And he said, you know what? I can compete on price, I can compete on value and selection. The only thing I can't compete on is entertainment value. And it's the entertainment value if it's a Saturday, let's go shopping in Lindsay, we'll take the kids to McDonald's, we'll do this and that. And he said, that is what is just making this business really hard. And that is writ 1,000 for all the businesses that are in Haliburton County. So I implore you all to, number one, care about the community, and I know you all do because you're all here, right? But there are many ways that you care. One of them is just by learning about each other, and that's, you know, the Echo, the Highlander, the Times. They're all introducing you to the people in your community. You get to learn more about them. It just takes an hour of your time every week to read the stories. So you make that investment. You have to shop locally. I think, you know, again, I understand about it's more expensive here. There's less selection, but as far as you can, in the many ways that you can, please try to keep those threads between us strong. And I was thinking, I think it's okay if I break soon. But one of the things that I've been struck by in this whole transition to online, and what this man had said and came out, is people wanted to be heard. Like, they just were like, I want to have my voice. I want to be able to say what I want. And that's why, again, people like social media, people like their, you know, blogs, all these sites, is people wanted to be heard. And what I believe more and more in is, first, it's important to be seen. We all have to see each other. You have to see me, and yes, I don't know, you come into this room, I don't know what you have thought about me in the past. You have to be able to see me as just complex, but like a fellow human being. It's just see each other. Be aware that we are all doing the best that we can. Some of us, you know, we don't always do everything right. We're going to be talking after the break about the digitization project, and in one hand, I'm really super excited about how many, how accessible all of these stories are. I'm also really, maybe this is the fourth time I'm terrified, because you're going to find out how many mistakes I made. and there's lots, you know. So anyway, I just, before we take the break, on that point about how many mistakes I've made, I just also want to say I am so grateful for what a forgiving community this was, because I did make mistakes, I did make bad choices, I sometimes wrote about things I shouldn't, I sometimes didn't write about things I should have. And throughout it all, people forgave me, people tolerated the mistakes, I corrected them as I could, but you all just let me just grow in front of you, and I'm incredibly grateful. So have some coffee. Okay, thank you.